You aren't welcome here. Too loud. Take your money somewhere else. The bar owner spat out the words, pointing to the door. Marcus Johnson, a recently discharged Navy SEAL, stood motionless, his beer untouched. He hadn't said a word, hadn't caused any trouble, just sat quietly watching. Loud? Marcus finally asked, his voice low and steady. I didn't even finish my first drink. The owner just gestured rudely toward the exit. Get out before I make you. The following afternoon, as the bar prepared for rush hour, the front door swung open and in walked not one but 12 imposing figures, all with the same unmistakable presence as Marcus. Marcus was trying to find his place in a world that felt strange after 14 years as a Navy SEAL. Intense training, covert operations, hostile environments, and unbreakable bonds of brotherhood forged in adversity. Civilian life felt eerily quiet. He received an honorable discharge after his last mission when injuries finally forced him into a retirement he wasn't ready to accept. He moved to the small coastal town of Harbor Bay, hoping the ocean air would calm the restlessness that consumed him. Marcus didn't fit the Hollywood stereotype of a SEAL. He was of average height, lean, with watchful eyes that saw everything and a restrained energy that often made him seem distant to strangers. He kept his hair short and wore practical, unremarkable clothes. He wasn't looking for trouble or attention, just a moment of normality, a quiet place to think. He entered the Blue Anchor, a waterfront bar popular with locals and tourists. It had a good reputation for live music on weekends, but today, a Tuesday, it was practically empty with only a few regulars hunched over their drinks. Marcus sat down at a corner table, ordered a beer, and settled in to observe, a habit ingrained after years of needing to assess every environment. The owner of the Blue Anchor, a burly, perpetually grumpy man named Frank Wilkins, prided himself on running a strict establishment. His definition of strict, however, often translated into arbitrary enforcement of unwritten rules based on his mood or perception of the customer. He had a particular aversion to military types, the result of a minor altercation involving young sailors years ago that had become a serious incident in his mind. He saw them as inherently problematic, arrogant, and prone to violence. What Frank would never admit, even to himself, was how his prejudice increased exponentially when those military types were also black. Marcus was the embodiment of his two greatest discomforts, military and black. When Marcus walked in, Frank noticed him immediately, the quiet intensity, the way he scanned the room, the subtle alertness. Frank didn't see a man looking for a quiet drink. He saw a potential threat, someone who didn't fit in with his preferred clientele of big-spending tourists or submissive locals. Marcus sat quietly for about 15 minutes, drinking his first beer, staring at the dusty nautical charts pinned to the wall, when Frank decided to act. He approached Marcus' table, arms crossed, expression already hostile. "All right, buddy," Frank began, his voice unnecessarily loud in the quiet bar. "You've been sitting here staring for 15 minutes. Are you planning something?" Marcus looked up, surprised. "Just enjoying my beer. Thinking." "Thinking?" Frank sneered. "I don't like your kind of thinking in my establishment. It makes the other customers nervous." He looked around ostentatiously, though the few other patrons were visibly ignoring the exchange. "My kind?" Marcus asked, his voice calm though a warning flashed in his eyes. "And what kind would that be?" That's when Frank leaned in, his beer and cigarette breath hitting Marcus. The quiet, intense military type. Then, looking directly at Marcus' dark skin, he added, "You guys always cause trouble, think you can mix where you don't belong. People like you aren't welcome here. Too loud." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Loud? I haven't said a word to anyone but the bartender. I haven't moved from this table." "That doesn't matter," Frank replied sharply, his face reddening. "I know your type. You're all the same. I run a respectable place here." The injustice of it, the sheer irrational prejudice hit Marcus hard. After all he had seen, all he had done for the country this man called his own, to be judged and dismissed so casually by an intimidating bar owner based solely on his race and demeanor was a bitter pill to swallow. As the sun set that night, what prejudiced Frank Wilkins couldn't imagine was how his small act of discrimination was about to turn into a lesson in humility he would never forget. Because in the SEALs, you learn that true strength isn't in the immediate confrontation, but in the strategic response. The one that comes when you least expect it and in an overwhelming way. Marcus walked slowly back to his small rented apartment, the bitter taste of injustice still lingering in his mouth. It wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice. Growing up as a young black man in the southern United States had been a constant lesson in the subtleties and brutalities of racism. But something about this incident struck him differently. As he entered his Spartan apartment, Marcus reached for his phone. He hesitated for a moment, then opened a secure app he had rarely used since his discharge, the confidential communication channel for SEAL Team 6, his former platoon. He typed a simple message, Blue Anchor, Harbor Bay. Landlord Frank Wilkins. Explicit racial discrimination against veteran. Just FYI. He sent it without waiting for a response. He wasn't asking for help, wasn't requesting intervention. It was just a sharing of information, as he had learned to do in his years serving as an intelligence operator in the field. Meanwhile, at Blue Anchor, Frank Wilkins was watering his prejudices with generous doses of cheap whiskey. "I can't believe that guy had the audacity to act like he belonged here," he complained to Mike, his security guard, a failed former MMA fighter who shared his narrow views. "These military guys think they're special, and when they are, you know." Frank made a vague gesture that replaced words he knew he couldn't say out loud. "It's like they want to dominate everything. Not in my bar." Mike nodded, the scar on his face contorting with his crooked smile. "You did the right thing kicking him out. Those guys don't understand anything but force." The next morning, Marcus' phone rang at 5:30 a.m. precisely, the time he had been waking up for the past 14 years. "Marcus," the voice was unmistakable, Commander Carlos Hernandez, his former team leader. "Commander," Marcus replied, instantly alert. "I got your message. I talked to some of the guys." A significant pause. "We're interested in this establishment." Marcus sat up straight. "Sir, it wasn't my intention." "When something affects one of us, it affects all of us," Hernandez interrupted. "Besides, many of us are about to transfer to West Point Naval Base. It's only 30 minutes from Harbor Bay." The revelation surprised Marcus. He didn't know his former unit was being transferred so close. "That's interesting," he replied carefully. "Very interesting," Hernandez agreed. "We'll need a place to relax on the weekends. A beachfront bar seems ideal." His voice took on the tone he used when planning sensitive operations. "We're considering visiting the establishment, assessing the atmosphere, seeing if the owner is receptive to military patrons." Marcus felt an involuntary smile appear. "I see. I'll be in town tomorrow. Coffee at 8 o'clock at Porter's?" "I'll be there, sir." At Porter's Diner, Hernandez, a man of Mexican descent with graying hair and eyes that could convey orders without words, was punctual at 8 o'clock. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but his athletic build and impeccable posture made his military identity obvious. "Marcus," he greeted him with a strong handshake. "It seems that civilian life isn't as peaceful as expected." After briefly discussing the transition to civilian life, Hernandez placed a folder on the table. "We did a little research on Mr. Wilkins and his establishment." Marcus opened the folder, finding photos, financial reports, and a history of complaints to the city. "How did you get this so fast?" Hernandez smiled. "You're not the only intelligence operator on the team, Johnson. We have friends in the business licensing department, the IRS, and the health department." The folder revealed a pattern. In the last 3 years, 5 formal complaints of discrimination had been filed against Blue Anchor, all dismissed without consequences. 2 came from black military personnel from a nearby base. Frank also had 2 recent health violations resolved with suspicious speed. "Looks like our friend has a behavioral problem," Hernandez commented. "And maybe some friends in city enforcement." Marcus calmly leafed through the documents. His mind, trained to identify patterns and vulnerabilities, was already beginning to make connections. "We're not talking about just one isolated incident, then?" "Exactly. We're talking about a systematic pattern of discrimination." Hernandez pointed to a specific sheet. "And interestingly, his establishment's liquor license is currently up for renewal." Marcus looked up, understanding the implication. "What exactly do you have in mind, Commander?" "Let's just say that 6 members of the team will be off duty tomorrow, and we're all curious to check out this beachfront bar that's so selective." Hernandez flashed a smile that Marcus knew well from the most challenging missions. "Will you join us?" Marcus hesitated for just a second before nodding. "What's the dress code?" "Casual." "Very casual," Hernandez finished his coffee. "We want to be just ordinary citizens enjoying a Friday afternoon." That evening, Marcus watched the Blue Anchor from afar. Frank Wilkins stood at the entrance, laughing loudly with customers who shared his appearance and probably his prejudices. The man had no idea that his little empire of intolerance was about to receive some very special visitors. What Frank Wilkins didn't realize as he served drinks to those he considered worthy of his establishment was that he had awakened something far more dangerous than anger. He had activated the most lethal network of solidarity in the country, Men who had conducted operations in the most hostile terrain on the planet were now turning their impeccable training to a mission on home turf, teaching an unforgettable lesson about respect and consequences. And when the silent storm finally arrived, there would be no shelter for the prejudice he so proudly displayed as house policy. At 4:30 p.m. on Friday, the Blue Anchor began to fill up. Frank Wilkins supervised the bar with his usual arrogance, occasionally casting disdainful glances at customers who didn't fit his ideal standard. Mike, the bouncer, remained strategically positioned near the entrance, selectively intimidating anyone Frank indicated with subtle gestures. The door opened and Frank barely looked up. A black man of average height entered, Marcus. Frank immediately made eye contact with Mike, who began to move toward the entrance. But before he could take 3 steps, something unexpected happened. The door opened again. And again. And once more. One by one, 12 men entered, each with the same distinctive posture, back straight, movements restrained, gaze watchful. 6 were black, 3 Latino, 3 white, different ethnicities, same presence. An impressively diverse group, yet simultaneously uniform in their military precision. The regular customers immediately realized that something extraordinary was happening. Conversations ceased. The music seemed suddenly distant. Frank felt a chill run down his spine as the men, without exchanging words, strategically positioned themselves throughout the establishment. Commander Hernandez walked directly to the bar. "Mr. Wilkins, I presume?" His voice was calm, almost cordial, but laden with unquestionable authority. Frank swallowed hard. "Yes. How can I help you?" "My name is Carlos Hernandez. These are my colleagues." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. "We're interested in getting to know your establishment. We've heard you're selective about your clientele." Frank glanced desperately at Mike, who stood motionless, suddenly aware that he was completely outmatched. "I don't know what you're talking about," Frank tried, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Everyone is welcome here." "Interesting," Hernandez replied. He gestured, and one of the men, whom Frank would later learn was called Doc, placed a folder on the counter. "Because we have evidence to suggest otherwise." Doc opened the folder. 5 formal complaints of discrimination in the last 3 years, 2 specifically from black military personnel. Curiously, all filed away with no consequences. He turned the page. "And here, records of your health violations that were resolved with unusual speed." Frank's face drained. "How did you?" "That's not important," Hernandez interrupted. "What matters is that last night, you threw a man out of this establishment for no valid reason other than your own prejudice. A man who served this country for 14 years, risking his life, while you served drinks to a clientele selected by the color of their skin." Frank now realized the gravity of the situation. His eyes darted nervously between the men, finally recognizing what they were: not just military men, SEALs. The elite of the American Special Forces. "Look, there must be some misunderstanding," Frank tried, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Wilkins," Marcus' voice rang out clearly as he approached the bar. "You made your position very clear last night. People like you aren't welcome here. I'm just curious to know exactly what kind of people I am." The silence that followed was deafening. All the customers watched, many already with cell phones pointed, recording the moment. One of the SEALs, a huge man known as Tank, approached the counter. "Mr. Wilkins, we would like to inform you that your liquor license is currently under review. Coincidentally, my sister works for the Regulatory Commission." He paused. "And my cousin," added another SEAL, "is a reporter for the Harbor Bay Chronicle. He loves stories about systematic discrimination at local establishments." Frank felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. What do you want?" Hernandez smiled for the first time. "We want a place to relax on the weekends. A place where everyone is welcome, regardless of skin color or military background. A place where respect is the house policy." Doc then slid a document across the counter. "We have a few suggestions for making the Blue Anchor that place." Frank examined the paper with trembling hands. It was a detailed commitment, including a substantial donation to civil rights organizations, mandatory sensitivity training for all employees, and a clearly visible anti-discrimination policy at the entrance. This is extortion," Frank muttered, though without conviction. "No, Mr. Wilkins," Marcus replied calmly. "It's an opportunity. The opportunity to do the right thing without having your license revoked or your establishment become the center of a public scandal over discrimination. The opportunity to learn and grow rather than fall." Frank looked around. His regular customers watched in silence. Mike remained frozen. No one was on his side. "And if I refuse?" he asked, a last flash of defiance. Hernandez smiled again. "We're not here to threaten you, Mr. Wilkins. We're just talking as concerned citizens. Citizens with friends in interesting positions. Citizens who value justice and respect." At that moment, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, Frank Wilkins understood a fundamental truth. Real power never needs violence to impose itself. In the reflection of the calm, determined eyes of those men trained to take down dictators and dismantle terrorist cells, he saw something far more terrifying than physical threats. He saw relentless, methodical, and inevitable justice. As Frank signed the document with trembling hands, the customers applauded spontaneously. And in the silence that followed, one question hung in the air: how do you rebuild a world from the rubble of prejudice? The answer began there, in a seaside bar where the tide of change was finally beginning to rise. In the weeks following the Blue Anchor incident, as it became known to the local community, Harbor Bay witnessed a transformation that few could have predicted. The bar, once known for its exclusive atmosphere, became a symbol of a broader social change that spread throughout the coastal town. Frank Wilkins kept his word, not by choice but by necessity. The video of the confrontation, recorded by several customers, quickly circulated on social media. Within 48 hours, the Blue Anchor was facing an avalanche of online criticism and protesters on the sidewalk. The Liquor Licensing Board opened a formal investigation into previous complaints that had been shelved. The first visible change was the sign at the entrance: "Blue Anchor, where everyone is welcome." It wasn't just an empty phrase. Frank, faced with the financial reality of a collapsing business, implemented every item in the agreement signed under the watchful eye of the SEALs. The anti-discrimination training program for employees was conducted by a local civil rights organization that received part of Frank's substantial donation. Mike, the security guard, was replaced by a diverse team of professionals trained not to intimidate but to ensure a safe environment for everyone. For Marcus, the change was deeper than the satisfaction of seeing justice done. On a sunny afternoon, 3 months after the incident, he sat on the deck of the Blue Anchor, watching the waves break on the beach as he talked with Hernandez. "I never thought I'd be sitting here drinking peacefully," he said, taking a sip of his beer. Hernandez smiled. "It was never about the bar itself, Marcus. It was about establishing that no one, not even a bar owner in a small town, is above the consequences of his prejudice." The Blue Anchor now served as an unofficial meeting place for SEALs transferred to West Point Naval Base as planned. But more significantly, it had become a place where veterans of all backgrounds found camaraderie and respect. Frank Wilkins rarely appeared in the main room. He ran the business from the back, his presence diminished by the shadow of his own actions. When he crossed paths with Marcus, he nodded briefly, his face a mask of forced humility that never reached his eyes. Frank hadn't changed internally, few racists do when exposed, but his actions had changed, and that was what mattered. "Harbor Bay Tours and Adventures," Hernandez said, pointing to the brochure on the table. "How's business?" Marcus smiled genuinely. "Better than I expected. Apparently, my navigation skills and rough terrain training are perfect for guiding tourists on coastal expeditions." After years of serving on missions where he needed to blend into the shadows, Marcus discovered he had talents that shone in the light of day. His new adventure tourism company started modestly with a single rented boat. 3 months later, he owned 2 boats and had a waiting list of customers. "And who would be interested in investing in your business?" Hernandez asked, smiling mysteriously. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What, you?" "Not just me," Hernandez replied. "The whole team. We're looking for investments for the SEAL Pension Fund. Your business looks promising." That same afternoon, Marcus signed papers in his makeshift office on the pier, formalizing the partnership that would expand Harbor Bay Tours and Adventures to 5 boats and a staff of 12, including 4 unemployed veterans Marcus had personally recruited. Meanwhile, the Blue Anchor slowly built a new reputation. A discreet sign at the entrance now stated that 5% of all proceeds were donated to veteran support organizations and anti-racism causes. On a particularly busy Friday night, 6 months after the incident, Marcus watched the crowded hall. On stage, a band made up entirely of veterans performed. In the diverse crowd, locals, tourists, sailors, and civilians mingled without distinction. Frank, serving at the bar with a resigned expression, caught Marcus's eye and nodded stiffly. There was no friendship there, no genuine forgiveness, just the silent acknowledgement of a hard-learned lesson. "Sometimes," commented Doc, now an investor in Marcus' company, "the best revenge isn't destroying someone, but completely transforming the world around them. It wasn't revenge, Marcus replied calmly. It was justice. And justice isn't just punishing the wrong but creating the right. The story of Blue Anchor spread beyond Harbor Bay. It became a case study in corporate training on inclusion. Frank, still the nominal owner, was now effectively just an employee at his own establishment, the lasting consequence of decades of prejudice finally exposed. For Marcus, the incident marked not only the beginning of his successful civilian life but a new purpose. Through his company, he created opportunities for other veterans in transition. Through his example, he showed that quiet dignity often speaks louder than explosive anger. As he often told the young veterans he mentored, "We were taught to fight with weapons, but the most important battle is the one we fight with intelligence, strategy, and integrity, not just to win but to transform." True strength never lies in humiliating or demeaning, but in lifting up, not just yourself but an entire community.